I just went and checked the thermostat and it is 10 degrees colder in my room than it is outside. But outside it's 70, which means in my room it's 60 degrees right now. Hi, my name is Amanda. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing something just a little bit different than normal. So after doing my January wrap up, I realized that by the end of the month, I didn't totally remember some of the books that I read in the beginning of the month. And that's mostly my fault because I tend to read 15 to 20 books a month. So by the time I get to the end, if something didn't leave a really strong impression on me, I tend to put it towards the background of my brain, and if I sat long enough, I'd be able to pull the information up for you. But unfortunately with these videos, I don't want to sit and spend 3 hours trying to remember everything that I wanted to say. So I'm doing an experiment this month. Instead of doing all of my reading wrap up all at one time at the end of the month with all of the books that I read every single month, I'm going to be coming and doing them weekly. Now, that doesn't affect you at all because I'm actually going to put all of these videos together into one final video that will be edited really nicely and released at the end of February. But this is an experiment on my part. If this goes really well, I think this is something I might keep up doing in the future. Maybe I'll do it every 2 weeks instead of every single week. I don't know. This is an experiment. I'll let you know how it goes by the end of it. Anyways, I really wanted to let you guys know that because you're probably going to be noticing that I'll be changing outfits throughout the video. Maybe the lighting will be changing, possibly even location changes. So this is definitely going to change because I keep this updated to whatever book I'm currently reading. So all the books will be listed down below in case you want any information. So the first book I DNF'd was Sorcery. I was really excited about this book because I've heard some pretty decent things about it, and I don't know why I didn't connect the dots to the fact that, like, I don't like Greek myths. I don't know what it is about me. I feel like everyone else in my life is like super into Greek stuff. That kind of happens when you're an art kid. Like, they just go through a Greek period in their lives, but like I never had one. I guess maybe that this book would be the exception, and it wasn't. I was listening to the audiobook and I made it probably about an hour into it when I realized that, one, I had no clue who any of these people were or why any of it mattered. I actually recognized like one name and that was it. And two, I didn't care. And I've started a few years ago allowing myself to realize that when I am in a book and I physically do not care about any of it, I shouldn't force myself to read it anymore. The next book that I read was also an audiobook, and this one was also almost a DNF, and then I decided, nope, I'm gonna stick through it even though I don't care that much. I'm curious enough to get to the end, and it was much shorter, so I stuck with it. And that is Spellslinger. This book was all about how magic is a con game and you just need to rethink the way that you're looking into magic to use it. I found some concept very interesting about the book, such as the main character, Kellen, could not control magic himself, but he came from a family where they were all really strong with magic, so there was that element of him not feeling like he was a part of his family. And also, something that surprised me was the book took place in like the Midwest Americas. Like, they didn't use the term America, of course, but we had cowboys and gunslingers and stuff all like that, and it's something that I should have picked up from the title, but I guess I just didn't because reasons. I think if I had known that that's more of what the book was going to be like, I would have gone into it and really enjoyed it. But because I was expecting it to be more fantasy-esque with kind of these elements of like medievaler times, I was kind of shocked and my system didn't like what I was listening to. I also think that it was super obvious that the book was written by a man. I can't even pin down what exactly made me feel that way, except maybe for the fact that the way Kellen looked at the world just felt very one-sided, and maybe that was just how his character was supposed to be, but to me it felt more like that's what the author believed the world was supposed to be. There were a few other problems I had, one of them being that I felt like the book was a little bit predictable. There were some really sweet moments that I enjoyed, specifically when Kellen was learning to use magic in a different way than everyone else because he didn't have magic. I'm trying to talk about this without spoiling it. I definitely think that this is a series that someone else would really enjoy. I just think that for me personally, it wasn't one that was for me. The next book that I listened to was an Audible original, and that is the book Peterpan. So I have never been a huge fan of Peterpan. I remember growing up and definitely thinking that like something wasn't quite right with the story, and I never had words to express what that was. I then got this because it was free as an Audible member. I can get originals once a month, and that was the one I decided to pick, and I listened to it right after finishing Spellslinger before one of my other books could arrive, and I hated it. I did read in the reviews after finishing it that this Audible original is not accurate to the original story, so I'm definitely curious to know what the differences are and if that would change my opinion, but as of right now I have no interest in reading anything related to Peterpan after this. The narration, the full cast acting, the sound effects, all of that put together was amazing. The performance was so good. 5 out of 5 stars for all of that. But the book is 3 hours long, and I could barely finish it. About an hour in, I knew that I had no interest in it, that I didn't want to finish it. I was so close to DNFing it, but I just kept telling myself, like, it's a 3-hour book, just finish it. If you listen on ×2 speed, that's an hour and a half. Like, you can do this, Amanda. I ended up rating the book 2 out of 5 stars, and that is simply because the performance quality was so good in my mind that I couldn't easily rate it 1 out of 5 stars. I also then ended up reading through all of the comments, not all of them, but a good chunk of the comments on Goodreads, especially in the top tier, and I felt like I was agreeing with almost everyone who was complaining about the book on there. So in my review on Goodreads, I ended up not saying very much, except for that I felt like it was a waste of my time and that I really wish I hadn't bothered starting the book from the beginning. A lot of people were complaining about the stuff that had to do with the fact that Wendy, a young girl, was supposed to be taken away to this magical land and swept off her feet and be this like superior being, and then all of a sudden she's basically a slave mom to all of these boys who are growing up who don't seem to listen to her and don't seem to care about her. Peterpan himself was a dick through the entire book. I don't get why Wendy was interested in him. There's this really weird romance that grows even though they're kind of seen as children. It just felt wrong. But also then there was just nothing seemed to matter, nothing seemed to stick. It just, a lot of the book was told in like past tense, where Wendy was telling the Lost Boys stories about stuff they had just previously done. Also though, like, Neverland has always been in my mind this like magical place that everyone wants to go to, and after having listened to this audiobook, I would never want to go there. There's vicious mermaids who are trying to kill you, there's lost girls who are trying to kill you, there's pirates who are trying to kill you, there's animals who are trying to kill you. And then on top of that, not only do your family members back home lose all memory of you and who you used to be, but also you start to lose memory of who they are, and on top of that, you start to lose memories completely. There were moments where Wendy and her brothers, James and Michael, were talking about something they had just done the day before and they couldn't really remember it. It was like this hazy memory, and they were like, what did we do? I don't even remember. Was it important? Was it not? And then they ended up, like, when they did remember it, it ended up being something huge where us normal people would not have forgotten it. And then on top of that, oh my god, I don't know what finger I'm on anymore. Let's just say this is number 10. On top of all of that, Captain Hook and Smee are gay lovers. I'm sorry, like, they didn't say it in the book ever. They just kept saying that they were like first mate and captain. But like, Captain Hook kept referring to Smee as his beautiful, wonderful first mate, or his, oh, I don't even remember all of the terms he used, but he kept referring to him as beautiful or wonderful or great to have around. And I don't get why you're gonna keep bringing up all of those terms to describe someone and then not have them be a couple. Like, what was that? I don't understand what was happening. I have a lot of thoughts about this book, but honestly, after I finish this review, I'm going to try to erase all of them and just know in my heart that I never want to listen to that audiobook again. Editing Amanda here. Hi. So I just finished that scene, and I'd like to say that I'm really proud to say that I actually managed to forget all of that. I'm sitting here editing this review and I'm like, I don't even really remember reading this book, so I did a good job. Next on my list, I managed to complete my 2020 reread challenge for February, which means I read this on my Kindle, Selection, The Elite, and The One by Kiera. I have a whole entire video series coming out about my process of doing that, so I'm not going to get into details right now about that experience. I'll link it somewhere so you guys can go watch it. But I enjoyed the series, not as much as the first time. They all went down in rating and only one of them managed to stay on my favorites bookshelf. I'm really glad I did it and I enjoyed the process of doing it, and it made me look forward to some of the books that I'll be rereading later on this year. So that is all the books that I have currently finished. What is on my shelf right now? I am listening to the audiobook The King of Crows by Libba Bray, and I'm about to start Middlegame by Seanan McGuire, who I just found out is a woman and I felt really bad that I've been calling her a man this entire time. It's week 2 and I read 2 books this week. Well, I finished 2 books this week, and in the exciting news, they were both 5 stars. The first book that I read was one that I listened to, and that was King of Crows by Libba Bray. This is the 4th and final book in the Diviners series. There's 4 of them, and it was absolutely so amazing. Such a good conclusion, such a good finale. Through a good chunk of the book, I was flipping between a 4.5 and a 5, but the thing that threw me over the edge and managed to allow me to rate the book 5 out of 5 stars was the weirdest thing. It was the author's note at the end of the book. Up until the very last chapter, I was still on board with rating it a 4.5, and then the audiobook, which oftentimes they don't have this, had an author's note, and oftentimes, even if they do have them, I don't listen to them, but I decided to for some off chance, and I'm so glad I did. And if you are reading this book series, please listen to her author notes or read them, whatever your jam may be. Anyways, in this author's note, she talked a lot about discrimination in America and about how a lot of problems from our start are still here. While they're not maybe as strong or as prevalent, there's still issues that minorities are facing every single day. And I was driving home from work while listening to it, and I almost cried. I cannot tell you the last time I actually cried in a book, and I don't think I've ever cried in an audiobook. And there were like tears in my eyes. Like if I blinked, they were going to run down my face. It was just very impactful. The entire book series, without spoiling anything, is about these teenagers, young adults, kids, I don't know what you want to call them. Let's say they're about 15, I believe one of them is 11, but about 15 to 20 years old, and they are living in New York in the 1920s, and they all seem to have these different abilities. I don't want to call them magical abilities, but they call themselves the Diviners, and most of those abilities seem to be focused around communicating with the dead or having some kind of influence with the dead in one way or another. These people come together to help solve problems and try to figure some things out. It's a large cast of characters. They're all such unique and wonderful characters, and the reason why the author's note was about discrimination is because almost every single one of them is a minor. Race, ethnicity, sexuality, socioeconomical state, they're all very, very different. We have characters who are gay or lesbian, we have characters who use crutches, we have characters who are black facing racism in the 1920s, we have a Jewish character, but then also we have a German character who is not racist by any means, and then we have white blonde-haired girl. There's just a wide range of characters. One of the characters faced domestic abuse in her relationship. It is just a beautiful melting pot of what America actually is and the side of things that you never actually get to see. That's my dog Shadow. And it is absolutely so good and so amazing, and I highly recommend this book. I really recommend the audiobook if you can get your hands on them. All 4 of them were absolutely amazing. They had a very nice creepiness level to them. Nothing that made me uncomfortable, but stuff that would make me pause and go, ooh, like that's spooky, I like it. So, book series recommended. The next book that I listened to on audio was Gideon the Ninth. And throughout this entire book, I was leaning towards rating it a 4 out of 5 stars. This sounds familiar. And then in the last 2 chapters, my rating went up, because up until that point, the author hadn't done anything to really surprise me. There were many predictable moments, and there were many unpredictable moments, but I hadn't been shocked by anything that had happened. And then in the last 2 chapters, she did a few things that just, I wasn't ready for them. And it was done so well and in such a good way that I raised my rating to 5 stars. I do plan on re-listening to this audiobook before the sequel comes out, and I believe it comes out in June or July of this year, 2020, because I had some issues paying attention to the audiobook and I feel like I missed large chunks of the book because I zoned out. I know this is an issue that means I would normally rate a book less, because if it can't hold my full attention, then it doesn't deserve a 5 out of 5 stars. But this book deserves it. I don't think it was the book's fault that I was zoning out. I think I'm just really busy right now, and so my mind tends to wander and starts to think about work things. And other reason why my brain could have wandered a little bit, and this is the book's fault unfortunately, is there are so bless you. There are so many characters in the book. It is a large cast, very, very large. The book is focused around about 20 people and what they're doing and how they're interacting with each other, and that's not a good audiobook. I would not recommend this book for anyone else to listen to. I enjoyed it. I'm going to listen to it again in the future, preferably right before the sequel comes out, so that I can try to refresh my mind and maybe pick up on some of the things that I missed last time. But I don't think I really got the full concept of it from listening to it. This book was about a girl named Gideon, and she is trapped on the 9th planet in this world. So one thing I wasn't totally ready for was this book I thought was going to be more fantasy-esque, and there were many fantasy-esque themes. I definitely say it is a fantasy book, but it also had a lot of sci-fi themes, and I am not super into sci-fi books. I love sci-fi TV, I love sci-fi movies, but the books, I feel like they pull short a lot of times. This book, though, had a lot of space travel, referring to spaceships, going back and forth between planets. It wasn't a huge part of the book, and I think that's why I still was able to enjoy it. There's a girl named Gideon. She's stuck on the 9th planet. She wants to get out and she wants to fight in this war, but she can't. She is stuck on this planet as basically a slave. The princess of this planet is a necromancer, and she is called to the 1st planet along with 8 other necromancers and their guard to fight in this challenge to figure out who can basically ascend to a higher plane. Those aren't the words that were all used in this book, but it's a good explanation. Gideon is promised that if she goes along with the princess necromancer, that at the end of it she will gain her freedom and she can go fight off in the war like she's always wanted to. Now, the really fun part about this is there's a lot of secrets, a lot of twists and turns and all of that, but Gideon and the princess hate each other. Like, have tried to murder each other multiple times, and now they're going off into this dangerous environment where they have to keep each other alive. And then you throw in this idea of a competition and all these different characters coming together and working against each other, and each of the different 9 houses has like something that they focus on. Some of the characters are more pure and chaste and godly, and some of them are more open to experiences and brash and narcissistic. So while this book also focuses on 2 white women, it is such a broad category of a large cast of lots of different people, and it was so interesting to listen to, even though I wasn't always sure who the audiobook was talking about, to listen to the diversity in it and all of everyone who was just taking part in it. If Gideon had been a man, I would not have liked this book. The thing that made it stand out was that Gideon was a woman, and her personality was so different from what you normally see women get, and she was just such a unique character because she was a woman. If she had been a man, though, it would have come off wrong and it wouldn't have been as good, and I wouldn't have enjoyed the book. Anyways, that was everything that I finished this week. It's absolutely amazing that both of the books I read were 5 out of 5 stars. I also got about 100 pages into Middlegame, which so far I can also say is a 5 out of 5 star. The reason why I have not finished this book this week is because after reading the first 100 pages, I decided that I wanted to annotate the book while I was reading it, and it's a library book, so I can't do that. So I bought my own copy, and it just did not arrive in time for me to read anymore. After that, I have a few other ones that I am interested in listening to / reading, but I will get into that more next week. Hi, welcome back. You know it's a new week simply because not only is there a new filming location, but my face looks completely different because last time I filmed on a weekday and this time I'm filming on a weekends. Anyways, before I get started, I really quickly want to comment. I am not finished with Middlegame. I'm close to 350 pages through. I plan on finishing this book in the next 2 to 3 days. Speaking of, I kind of had a funky week this week. I ended up DNFing 3 books and I only finished reading 2. And those 2 I didn't feel as attached to as I thought I would. Basically, both of those were rereads and I downrated them from last time. I think I was kind of going through a funk, which is partially why I'm not as far into Middlegame as I wanted to be, because I wanted to wait until I was in a better headspace to read it. I also realized that sometimes the way to get out of a funky headspace is to read a really good book. Starting from the beginning of the week, I was listening to the audiobook for Upon a Burning Throne. I ended up DNFing it. I believe it was around 5 to 10%. I just wasn't really into it. On Goodreads, I left a rating of a 3. I was pretty sure that if I had finished the book that's what I would have rated it. The parts that I was liking about it, I was really curious about the storyline. There was a lot of representation. The 2 main boys are both disabled in some sort of way, and they're feeling a lot of prejudice from the rest of the world because of that. They are both going to be the princes. They're going to rule together. Basically, the people have decided that they are both half of a person, but together they will be able to rule as a whole, complete person. And I was really curious to see how the author was going to basically get rid of that stigma, because it was very ableist, and I felt like the purpose of the book was to show that this is how the world thinks, but this is not how the world should think. Also, I was really into it because it was set in an Indian setting, Middle Eastern, that kind of location, and I really am fascinated by books taking place in places that are not where I'm originally from. The reason why I ended up DNFing it and why I don't think I will ever actually finish the book is because the writing was tedious. There was so much extra in the book, so much more written. Every single time the author was trying to make a point. For instance, at one point the boys were camping in the woods with, I believe he was their uncle. They talk about how one of the boys was afraid of the forest and one of the boys was not afraid of the forest. He said it in this poetic, beautiful way, and I got it and it was great. But then he said it again in another poetic, beautiful way. And then he said it again, and then he said it again. And about 10 minutes later, I'm listening to the audiobook and I'm like, nothing new has been said to me except for this boy is afraid of the woods. And so I basically came to the conclusion that if it kept on going like that, I was going to DNF the book, and it kept doing that. And even though I was so curious about the story itself, I felt like it wasn't worth me wasting my time to finish reading it. The next book that I DNF'd, and oh my god, I feel so bad about this one, was City of Brass. This is the second time I've tried reading this book and the second time I have DNF'd it, and I feel like I'm about to get some flack because I just said that I love reading books taking place in Middle Eastern cultures, and this one definitely was doing that. But that is not why I DNF'd it, people. The reason why I DNF'd this book the first time is I was listening to the audio and I felt like it was too confusing for me to really understand everything that was going on, and that I needed to read it physically in order to get the full book in its glory. So I got the book from my library, the physical hardback, and I started reading it, and I made it 50 pages in, and I was very interested in everything that was happening. And then 50 pages in, the author changed POVs to this character that was unrelated to the story I was currently reading, and I was absolutely so bored with it. I just couldn't continue. I think I read like 5 pages with that character, and then I kind of like flipped ahead to see how long that character was going to be talking, and he was going to be talking for over 20 pages, and then the next chapter was going to be another new character that I didn't know anything about and didn't care about, and I couldn't do it. Also, one of the things that character was kind of dealing with was rebellion, the idea of like rebelling against the government, moving against it, like government is bad, let's move on. I feel like I've read that before and I wasn't interested in reading it this time. So I ended up rating that book 3 stars on Goodreads because I do believe that if I had finished it, that's what I would have rated it. Sometimes when I DNF books, I don't rate them, and that's because I didn't get far enough in to get a feel for what I would have rated it. This book, I got far enough in that I felt okay with giving it a rating. Oh, I feel so bad about this one too. But the next book I DNF'd was Fire and Blood by George R.R. Martin. I am currently working on a full video of my experience with reading and DNFing and rating that book. Yeah, it was a history textbook. I'm not gonna get into it too much because you can go watch that video if you really want to know in-depth thoughts about it. But also, I feel like if you want to know anything that I'm going to say, you can just go read anyone's Goodreads review about it. Like, I'm not saying anything new about this book that hasn't been said. I even talk in the video a little bit about how I kind of fall into this middle ground of George R.R. Martin fans, where like some of the fans are really against him for writing this book because they're like, it didn't add anything to the world and you just wasted time that you could have been using to write Winds. And then some of the fans are like, he's trying to be creative, he's trying to get out of his writing funk, like we just worship anything that he's willing to give us because he doesn't owe us anything. And I saw this really good review online, and it wasn't for this book, but it was for another book where people have been waiting a long time for the next one. I believe it was whatever the third book for The Name of the Wind is called. I'm not sure what the third one's title is. And someone basically said in their review of that third one, which they haven't read, so I don't know why they were leaving a review, but anyways, they said that while, yes, George is not our, and I'm going to use Neil Gaiman's words here, George is not our bitch, and he's not required to write anything for us. The person followed that up with, yeah, he isn't. He doesn't owe us this book. He can write it in his own time. He can write other things while he's working on it, and that's fine. The issue comes with when you promise someone something, there is an expectation for you to fulfill that promise. And he kind of compared it to if you go to a nice restaurant and you order a 3-course meal and you get 2 of your courses and then you're waiting for the 3rd course and it never shows up and it never shows up and you're waiting and waiting and waiting, you're gonna be a little bit angry because you were told you were getting 3 courses. Now I know that's not a perfect analogy to books and writing and all of that stuff, but I think it was a good way for me to think about the next book in the Game of Thrones series. Wow, okay, that was a lot of words that weren't actually anything about fire and blood, but I think this is more important for me to say here, and you guys can just go check out the video for Fire and Blood instead of me talking about the rating. I did leave it with a 3-star on Goodreads because I also felt like I had read enough of the book to leave it a decent rating. The next book that I read this week was an audiobook, and it was something that I was supposed to read in March. It is part of my 2020 reread challenge, but I did it a little bit early because a few things are kind of changing in my life. I listened to the audiobook for The Darkest Minds. That is how I read it the first time. This is how I read it the second time. I don't exactly remember what I rated it the first time, but I think it was 4 or 4.5 stars. If you'd like to know all of the details about this book and my reread experience, there's also going to be a video about this that will be coming out later in March though. I'm actually going to release the video at the right time, even though I listened to the book at the wrong time. I ended up rating the book 3.75 out of 5 stars. I talk about that whole experience in that video, so I'm not going to go any more in depth with it here. This is a book that while I was reading it, I was kind of struggling with this mentality of like, I own this audiobook and I can't return it because I've owned it for so long on Audible, but I don't see myself ever rereading it, so that's kind of a bummer. But by the end of the audiobook, I do think this is something that I would one day want to re-listen to, so I'm glad I have it for that opportunity, and maybe in a few years you'll be seeing me talking about me rereading it for the 3rd time. Final book that I listened to this week was Sorcery of Thorns. This was also a reread for me, but it was not part of my 2020 rereads challenge. Any of the talking about it that is going to happen will be happening right here in this video. So I read this book for the first time pretty much right when it came out last year, so it wasn't that long ago, and I think that that was my biggest issue, was I caught myself zoning out a lot during the book because it was like I already knew everything that was happening. I didn't remember it in enough detail that I could have been zoning out the way I was doing it. Originally thought I had rated this book 5 out of 5 stars. I knew it was on my favorites list. When I went to rate it the second time, I was a little bit bummed because I was gonna have to lower it, but when I actually looked at my rating the first time, I did rate it 4.75 out of 5 stars, and that is what I ended up rating it the second time. So my rating didn't end up changing at all, but the reasons for me giving it not full 5 stars changed. So that's kind of interesting. The first time I read it, it, I rated it that because I felt like everything in the book was absolutely phenomenal and absolutely what I wanted in a book at that time and what I needed in my life, except I felt like the romance was too insta-lovey, and I wasn't a huge fan of how like instantly the two characters who end up together at the end seem to be for each other. The second time I read it, one of the things I was paying attention to was that to see if I felt the same way, and I didn't. There was one instance that I felt like there was kind of some insta-lovey stuff, and if you don't want spoilers, skip ahead 10 seconds and I'll be done with it. There is a point when Elizabeth says I love you to Nathaniel, and I felt like it was just too soon. But other than that one instance, I definitely think that the two characters were kind of like an enemies to lovers trope, which I guess is okay. It's not usually my favorite, but The reason why I lowered the rating from 5 stars to 4.75 stars this time was simply because I felt like the story dragged in a few locations. The book is marketed as this epic fantasy, but it definitely felt more like a YA standalone fantasy. And I just realized I haven't told you what this book is actually about. Sorcery of Thorns is about this girl named Elizabeth who has grown up in this library her whole entire life, and she is training to be a warden or someone who works with these, they're called grimoires in this world, or magical books, who basically have personalities and can kind of function somewhat. If you don't take proper care of these books, they turn into malefics, which basically are kind of like monsters that are hell-bent on destroying the world. Anyways, Elizabeth grows up in this library taking care of books and everything, and one day a crime happens and she is wrongly accused of it, and she is sent on this journey with this sorcerer who she has been told her entire life that sorcerers are evil and basically the epitome of Satan. And so she's very hesitant about him, and the two of them go on this journey to basically take her to justice. Although very quickly on the journey, I will spoil this small bit for you, of course it is found out that she is not guilty, but they still have to continue on this journey one reason or another. It's really not a journey book. The journey is a very small part of the book, but if I explain anything that happens in the plot beyond the journey, it's going to spoil things, and I don't want to do that for you. Every once in a while I come across a book and I just feel like there's a certain character who is a gem and stands beyond the book itself, and that is the demon servant to the Thorn family. Cyrus is his name, and I know a lot of people absolutely love him. I like him as he is. I accept him as he is. He's great and he's a gem. I do recommend that book. I really enjoyed it. Both times reading it, a little bit less the second time. There is one more week left in February. I'm so far really enjoying this style of rating each book week to week that I read. I think it definitely allows me to talk about each book a little bit more accurately. I'll see how I feel at the end of this video to let you know if I think this is something I will continue to do or not. This coming week I am going to be finishing Middlegame. Hopefully I'll be finishing it. But hey, week 4 here and went. Let's go. Let's get started. I'm actually doing this just a little bit early because I fully understand that I am not going to be able to finish anything else that I am reading this month, everything that I finished this past week, and then we're going to wrap it up. And the first thing that I finished this week is, and hopefully you won't be too shocked, Middlegame. Okay. I really loved this book. I loved it so much so that I almost don't want to talk to you about it. I tabbed while reading, and I actually didn't tab the first 80 pages because I was using a library book, and then I bought my own copy. And then I didn't tab the last 100 pages because I was so into the book and into finishing it that I didn't want to be stopped and have to tab things. In case you couldn't quite tell, yeah, there's like a lot of tabs, and then beyond that I also underlined things that I didn't tab. I love this book. This book is about 2 children. They are twins. They were separated at birth through adoption. Their names are Roger and Dodger, and they seem to be able to talk to each other in their heads, and they're not totally sure if they're real or what's going on. Again, they're children, and they also seem to have this strange ability where one of them is extremely good at math and one of them is extremely good at English, or the spoken word, not English, but words. We also get the point of view of this alchemist whose name is Reed, and we follow him as he is conducting this experiment on these 2 children from a distance. And that's all I'm going to say. Okay, this book was so good, but I feel like if you go into reading it with knowing any of what it's about, it will ruin the book. Like, there are so many things I want to say to you all about this book because of how good it was, but I'm not going to do that because it will ruin your enjoyment of reading it. I ended up rating it 4.75 out of 5 stars because I felt that it wasn't quite deserving of 5. There were a few slow parts. There were a few things that I didn't fully understand, so I felt like they could have been explained a little bit better. This book really goes into some not heavy science, but some heavy alchemy. So some of those things were a little bit confusing for me at the end, and maybe it was because I was trying to get through and finish it because I was so excited about it that I didn't stop and reread to better understand what was going on. I am not going to be saying anything more about this book because I think that if you're at all interested in it, go ahead and read it. If you're not interested in it, check out someone else's summary because I'm not spoiling anything for anyone here. The next book that I read was an audiobook that I listened to, and that is The Shadows Between Us. That book came out this week and I pre-ordered it, so it arrived nicely on the day that it came out. I also vlogged my entire experience of reading this book, and you can already watch that video on my channel somewhere. So I'm not gonna be saying anything about it much here, except that I ended up rating it 3.25 out of 5 stars. I felt like it could have been a lot better and a lot more developed, but overall I did enjoy the book. The last book that I started this week and then DNF'd was The Wake of Vultures, and I am going to be doing a whole video on that book. It'll be coming out sometime in late March. So stay tuned and you can check it out what I have to say about that then. That's all that I have read and finished this week. I have a few other things that you will be able to catch up on in my March wrap up if you want to see that when it comes out, you know, a month from now. But I'm really excited. March has a lot of videos coming out that I filmed in February, and they are some really great videos, so I hope you come back and check those out. Let me know what you read in February and what you're planning on reading in March. My March TBR will be coming out very shortly, so get excited about that. Until next time, I really don't remember how my outros go anymore, so talk to me in the comments until next time.